Mr. Jones had a few days' holiday, so he said, I'm going to go to the mountains by train. He put on his best clothes, took a small bag, went to the station, and got into the train. He had a beautiful hat, and he often put his head out of the window during the trip and looked at the mountains, but the wind pulled his hat off. Mr. Jones quickly took his old bag and threw that out of the window too. The other people in the carriage laughed. Is your bag going to bring your beautiful hat back? They asked. No, Mr. Jones answered, but there is no name and no address in my hat, and there is a name and an address on the bag. Someone's going to find both of them near each other, and he's going to send me the bag and the hat. An old lady went out shopping last Tuesday. She came to a bank and saw a car near the door. A man got out of it and went into the bank. She looked into the car, the keys were in the lock. The old lady took the keys and followed the man into the bank. The man took a gun out of his pocket and said to the clerk, Give me all the money. But the old lady did not say this. She went to the man, put the keys in his hand, and said, Young man, you're stupid. Never leave your keys in your car. Someone's going to steal it. The man looked at the old woman for a few seconds. Then he looked at a clerk, and then he took his keys, ran out of the bank, got into his car, and drove away quickly without any money. Mary was an English girl, but she lived in Rome. She was 6 years old. Last year, her mother said to her, You're 6 years old now, Mary, and you're going to begin going to school here. You're going to like it very much because it's a nice school. Is it an English school? Mary asked. Yes, it is, her mother said. Mary went to the school and enjoyed her lessons. Her mother always took her to school in the morning and brought her home in the afternoon. Last Monday, her mother went to school at 4 o'clock and Mary ran out of her class. We've got a new girl in our school today, Mommy, she said. She's 6 years old too, and she's very nice, but she isn't English. She's German. Does she speak English? Mary's mother asked. No, but she laughed in English, Mary said happily. Mrs. Jones did not have a husband, but she had 2 sons. They were big, strong boys, but they were lazy. On Saturday, they did not go to school, and then their mother always said, Please cut the grass in the garden this afternoon, boys. The boys did not like it, but they always did it. Then somebody gave one of the boys a magazine, and he saw a picture of a beautiful lawnmower in it. There was a seat on it, and there was a woman on the seat. The boy took the picture to his mother and brother and said to them, Look, that woman sitting on the lawnmower and driving it and cutting the grass. We want one of these. One of these lawnmower? His mother asked. No, the boy said. We want one of those women. Then she can cut the grass every week. One of Harry's feet was bigger than the other. I can never find boots and shoes for my feet, he said to his friend Dick. Why don't you go to a shoemaker? Dick said. A good one can make you the right shoes. I've never been to a shoemaker, Harry said. Aren't they very expensive? No, Dick said. Some of them aren't. There's a good one in our village and he's quite cheap. Here's his address. He wrote something on a piece of paper and gave it to Harry. Harry went to shoemaker in Dick's village a few days later, and the shoemaker made him some shoes. Harry went to a shop again a week later and looked at the shoes. Then he said to a shoemaker angrily, "You're a silly man. I said make one shoe bigger than the other, but you've made one smaller than the other." Joe Richards finished school when he was 18, and then his father said to him, "You've passed your examination now, Joe, and you got a good marks in them. Now go and get some good works. They're looking for clever people at a bank in the town. The clerks there get quite a lot of money now." A few days later, Joe went to the bank and asked for work there. A man took him into a small room and gave him some questions on a piece of paper. Joe wrote his answers on a paper and then he gave them to the man. The man looked at them for a few minutes and then he took a pen and said to Joe, "Your birthday was on the 12th of June, Mr. Richards?" "Yes, sir," Joe said. "What year?" the man asked. "Oh, every year, sir," Joe said. Fred works in a factory. He does not have a wife and he gets quite a lot of money every week. He loves cars and has a new one every year. He likes driving very fast and he always buys small, fast red cars. He sometimes takes his mother out in them and then she always says, "But Fred, why don't you drive these cars? We're almost sitting on the road." Then Fred laughs. He likes being very near the road. Fred is very tall and very fat. Last week, he came out of a shop and went to his car. There was a small boy near it. He was looking at a beautiful red car. Then he looked up and saw Fred. "How do you get into that small car?" he asked him. Fred laughed and said, "I don't get into it. I put it on." Mr. and Mrs. Yadis had one daughter. Her name was Carol, and she was 19 years old. Carol lived with her parents and worked in an office. She had some friends, but she did not like any of the boys very much. Then she met a very nice young man. His name was George Watts, and he worked in a bank near her office. They went out together quite a lot, and he came to Carol's parents' house twice. And then, last week, Carol went to her father and said, "I'm going to marry George Watts, Daddy. He was here yesterday." "Oh, yes," her father said. "He's a nice boy, but has he got any money?" "Oh, man, all of you are the same," the daughter answered angrily. "I met George on the 1st of June and on the 2nd, he said to me, 'Has your father got any money?'" Miss Williams was a teacher, and there were 30 small children in her class. They were nice children, and Miss Williams liked all of them, but they often lost clothes. It was winter and the weather was very cold. The children's mother always sent them to school with warm coats and hats and gloves. The children came into the class in the morning and took off their coats and hats and gloves. They put their coats and hats on hooks on the wall, and they put their gloves in the pockets of their coats. Last Tuesday, Miss Williams found 2 small blue gloves on the floor in the evening. And in the morning, she said to the children, "Whose gloves are these?" But no one answered. Then she looked at Dick. Haven't you got blue gloves, Dick? She asked him. Yes, miss, he answered, but those can't be mine. I've lost mine. Whitebridge was a small village, and old people often came and lived there. Some of them had a lot of old furniture, and they often did not want some of it because they were in a smaller house now. So, every Saturday morning they put it out, and other people came and looked at it, and sometimes they took it away because they wanted it. Every Saturday, Mr. and Mrs. Morton put a very ugly old bird's head out at the side of their gate, but nobody wanted it. Then last Saturday they wrote, "I'm very lonely here, please take me," on a piece of paper and put it near the bird's head. They went to the town and came home in the evening. There were now 2 birds' heads in front of their house, and there was another piece of paper. It said, "I was lonely too." 2 old gentlemen lived in a quiet street in Paris. They were friends and neighbors, and they often went for walks together in the streets when the weather was fine. Last Saturday, they went for a walk at the side of the river. The sun shone. The weather was warm. There were a lot of flowers everywhere, and there were boats on the water. 2 men walked happily for half an hour, and then one of them said to the other, "That's a very beautiful girl." "Where can you see a beautiful girl?" said the other. "I can't see one anywhere. I can see 2 young men. They're walking toward us." "The girl's walking behind us," said the first man quietly. "But how can you see her then?" asked his friend. The first man smiled and said, "I can't see her, but I can see the young man's eyes." Fred was a young soldier in a big camp. During the week, they always worked very hard, but it was Saturday, and all the young soldiers were free. So, their officer said to them, "You can go into the town this afternoon, but first I'm going to inspect you." Fred came to the officer, and the officer said to him, "Your hair's very long. Go to the barber and then come back to me again." Fred ran to the barber's shop, but it was closed because it was Saturday. Fred was very sad for a few minutes, but then he smiled and went back to the officer. "Are my boots clean now, sir?" he asked. The officer did not look at Fred's hair. He looked at his boots and said, "Yes, they're much better now. You can go out, and next week, first clean your boots and then come to me." Mrs. Harris lives in a small village. Her husband is dead, but she has 1 son. He's 21 and his name is Jeff. He worked in a shop in the village and lived with his mother, but then he got work in a town and went and lived there. Its name was Green Sea. It was quite a long way from his mother's village, and she was not happy about this. But Jeff said, "There isn't any good work for me in the country, mother, and I can't get a lot of money in Green Sea and send you some every week." Mrs. Harris was very angry last Sunday. She got in the train and went to her son's house in Green Sea. Then she said to him, "Jeff, why don't you never phone me?" Jeff laughed. "But mother," he said, "you haven't got a phone." "No," she answered,
I haven't, but you've got one.
Sir Robinson never went to a dentist because he was afraid, but then his teeth began hurting a lot and he went to a dentist. The dentist did a lot of work in his mouth for a long time. On the last day, Mr. Robinson said to him, "How much is all this work going to cost?" The dentist said, £25, but he did not ask him for the money. After a month, Mr. Robinson phoned the dentist and said, "You haven't asked me for any money for your work last month." "Oh," the dentist answered, "I never ask a gentleman for money." "Then how do you live?" Mr. Robinson asked. "Most gentlemen pay me quickly," the dentist said, "but some don't. I wait for my money for 2 months, and then I said, 'That man isn't a gentleman,' and then I asked him for my money." He likes football very much, and he often goes to matches in our town on Saturdays. He does not go to the best seats because they are very expensive, and he does not see his friends there. There was a big football match in our town last Saturday. First it was very cold and cloudy, but then the sun shone and it was very hot. There were a lot of people on benches around Bill at a match. Bill was on one bench, and there was a fat man on a bench behind him. First, the fat man was cold, but then he was very hot. He took his coat off and put it in front of him, but it fell on Bill's head. Bill was not angry. He took the coat off his head, looked at it, and then smiled and said, "Thank you, but where are the trousers?" Peter was 8.5 years old, and he went to a school near his house. He always went there and came home on foot, and he usually got back on time, but last Friday he came home from school late. His mother was in the kitchen, and she saw him and said to him, "Why are you late today, Peter?" "My teacher was angry and sent me to the headmaster after our lessons," Peter answered. "The headmaster," his mother said. "Why did she send you to him?" "Because she asked a question in the class," Peter said, "and none of the children gave her the answer except me." His mother was angry. "But why did the teacher send you to the headmaster then? Why didn't she send all the other stupid children?" she asked Peter. "Because her question was, 'Who put glue on my chair?'" Peter said. He was 60 years old and he was ill. He was always tired and his face was always very red. He did not like doctors, but last month his wife said to him, "Don't be stupid, George. Go and see Dr. Brown." George said no, but last week he was worse and he went to the doctor. Dr. Brown examined him and then said to him, "You drink too much. Stop drinking whiskey and drink milk." George liked whiskey and he did not like milk. "I'm not a baby," he always said to his wife. Now he looked at Dr. Brown and said, "But drinking milk is dangerous, doctor." The doctor laughed and said, "Dangerous? How can drinking milk be dangerous?" "Well, doctor," George said, "it killed one of my best friends last year." The doctor laughed again and said, "How did it do that?" "The cow fell on him," George said. Mr. White has a small shop in the middle of our town, and he sells pictures in it. They're not expensive ones, but some of them are quite pretty. Last Saturday, a woman came into the shop and looked at a lot of pictures. Then she took Mr. White to one of them and said, "How much do you want for this one?" It was a picture of horses in a field. Mr. White looked at it, for a few seconds and then went and brought his book. He opened it, looked at the first page, and then said, "I want 20 pounds for that one." The woman shut her eyes for a few seconds and then said, "I can give you 2 pounds for it." "£2?" Mr. White said angrily. £2? But the canvas cost more than £2. "Oh, but it was clean then," the woman said. Miss Green had a heavy cupboard in her bedroom. "Last Sunday," she said, "I don't like this cupboard in my bedroom. The bedroom's very small and the cupboard's very big. I'm going to put it in a bigger room." But the cupboard was very heavy and Miss Green was not very strong. She went to 2 of her neighbors and said, "Please carry the cupboard for me." Then she went and made something for them. The 2 men carried the heavy cupboard out of Miss Green's bedroom and came to the stairs. One of them was in front of the cupboard and the other was behind it. They pushed and pulled for a long time and then they put the cupboard down. "Well," one of the men said to the other, "we're never going to get this cupboard upstairs." "Upstairs?" the other man said. "Aren't we taking it downstairs?" Mr. Edwards likes singing very much, but he's very bad at it. He went to dinner at a friend's house last week, and there were some other guests there too. They had a good dinner and then the hostess went to Mr. Edwards and said, "You can sing, Peter. Please sing us something." Mr. Edwards was very happy and he began to sing an old song about the mountains of Spain. The guests listened to it for a few minutes and then one of the guests began to cry. She was a small woman and had dark hair and very dark eyes. One of the other guests went to her, put his hand on her back and said, "Please don't cry. Are you Spanish?" Another young man asked, "Do you love Spain?" "No," she answered. "I'm not Spanish and I've never been to Spain. I'm a singer and I love music." Hans said to his friend Kurt, "I'm going to take my car and drive to London." Kurt said, "Driving to London is very difficult. You aren't going to find your hotel." But Hans was not afraid. He drove to Calais, put his car on the ship, took it off at Dover, and drove to London. He stopped near the city and looked at his map. Then he drove into London, but he did not find his hotel. He drove round and round for an hour. He stopped and got out of his car. A taxi came and Hans stopped it. "Take me to the Brussels Hotel," he said. But he did not get into the taxi. He got back into his car. The taximan laughed, but then he drove to the Brussels Hotel, and Hans followed him in his car. They reached the hotel in 2 minutes. George is a young man. He does not have a wife, but he has a very big dog, and he has a very small car too. He likes playing tennis. Last Monday, he played tennis for an hour at his club, and then he ran out and jumped into a car. His dog came after him, but it did not jump into the same car. It jumped into the next one. "Come here, silly dog," George shouted at it, but the dog stayed in the other car. George put his keys into the lock of the car, but the key did not turn. Then he looked at the car again. It was not his. He was in the wrong car, and the dog was in the right one. "He's sitting and laughing at me," George said angrily, but then he smiled and got into his car with the dog. Williams worked in a factory with a lot of other men. They talked and laughed a lot, and at lunchtime they sat together and read newspapers and laughed about the pictures in them. Then Fred married. His wife, Betty, was very nice, but she liked better newspaper than Fred. Every day, a boy brought Fred's newspaper and Betty's newspaper to the house, and Fred took his to the factory and left Betty's in the hall. Once or twice he looked at hers, but he did not like it, and sometimes in the evening he said to Betty, "Why do you read that paper? I hate it." But last Monday, Fred said to his wife, "There was something very nice in that newspaper yesterday." Betty was happy. "Oh," she said, "that's good, Fred. What was that?" Fred laughed and said, "My friend Bill's lunch. He brought it to work in a newspaper." Sir and Mrs. Jones very seldom go out in the evening, but last Saturday, Mrs. Jones said to her husband, "There's a good film at a cinema tonight. Can we go and see it?" Mr. Jones was quite happy about it, so they went and both of them enjoyed the film. They came out of the cinema at 11 o'clock, got into their car and began driving home. It was quite dark, and Mrs. Jones said, "Look, Bill, a woman's running along the road very fast, and a man's running after her. Can you see them?" Mr. Jones said, "Yes, I can." He drove the car slowly near the woman and said to her, "Can we help you?" "No, thank you," the woman said, but she did not stop running. "My husband and I always run home after the cinema, and the last one washed the dishes at home." There were a lot of men's clubs in London a few years ago. Men went there and read their newspaper quietly, or drank or had meals with their friends. All of these men's clubs had a lot of very good servants. At every club, one of the servants was a doorman. Mr. Grace was a doorman of one of these clubs. He was 55 years old and he had gray hair and a big gray mustache. The telephone rang in his office at 6 o'clock in the evening, and a woman spoke to him. Said, "Are you the doorman of the George Club?" "Yes, I am," Mr. Grace answered. "Please give my husband a message," the woman said. "Your husband isn't at a club this evening," Mr. Grace answered. "But I haven't told you his name," the woman said angrily. "That isn't necessary," Mr. Grace answered. "No husband is ever at a club." Jimmy lives in London and he began swimming a few months ago. He likes swimming and he often goes to the swimming pool near his house with his mother and swims there for an hour or two. He was 6 years old last week and his mother said, "You swim quite well now, Jimmy, but you've never seen the sea, have you? Your father and I are going to take you there on Sunday. You're going to swim in the sea. It isn't cold now and it's much nicer than a swimming pool." Jimmy's father and mother took him to the sea in their car on Sunday, and they stopped at a side of a small harbor. Jimmy got out and looked at the sea for a long time, but he was not very happy. Then he said to his mother, "Which is the shallow end?" Mrs. Green was 80, but she had a small car and she always drove to the shops in it on Saturday and brought her food. She did not drive fast because she was old, but she drove well and never hit anything. Sometimes her grandchildren said to her, "Please don't drive your car, grandmother. We can take you to the shops. But she always said, no, I like driving. I've driven for 50 years and I'm not going to stop now. Last Saturday, she stopped her car at some traffic lights because they were red, and then it did not start again. The lights were green, then yellow, then red, then green again, but her car did not start. What am I going to do now? She said. But then a policeman came and said to her kindly, Good morning. Don't you like any of our colors today?